Hey everyone, welcome to Unique Ways with Thomas Gerard, an audio podcast. Got a super awesome guest today. He's a creative with 20 years of making and breaking experiences for humans, and he's a senior vice president of user experience at Fisker Inc. Please join me in welcoming Todd Omotani. Welcome, Todd.
Thomas, thank you for having me. Excited to be here. I've been listening to your podcasts and yeah, this was exciting.
Awesome, glad to hear it. You ready for 20 questions?
I'm ready.
Okay, here we go. Number one, tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you do?
Well, currently I'm the senior vice president of user experience at Fisker. We are making an all-electric SUV called the Fisker Ocean. We've started production in November and it'll be coming to customers very soon. But I have an interesting background where my background isn't in automotive. I grew up in Calgary, Alberta. I know we have a big Canadian contingency on your podcast. I went to Alberta College of Art and moved to Vancouver to go to Emily Carr, where I graduated in the communication design program, which I thought was wonderful. And really from there, I had grown up in working in and out of print shops. My dad was in printing. My grandfather was in printing business forms, and I had run A.B. Dick and Heidelberg presses. And I thought, I was really going to follow down that path and be a print designer or packaging design. And I got invited to do a freelance project to make a printed book for a Need for Speed racing game, where they wanted me to make it look like you would get at an automotive dealership. And so I started making the book, and one thing led to another, and they had a big hit on their hands, and I joined the team as a interface designer after that, and the ball just kept on slowly moving forward, where I made a couple Need for Speed racing games, and then I jumped over to EA Sports, where I was the lead interface designer for next gen interfaces for EA Sports, and worked with a really wonderful team. And really just it kept evolving and evolving, and I started kind of had this motto. I was young, I was in my 20s, and I was have mouse will travel. And so I went from there and joined a team at EA in Chicago, and I met a bunch of actually really interesting people there, like Darren Bennett and Kudo Sonoda, who actually had a really big impact on my life later on when I joined Microsoft. But then just kept on going and making, then went back to Vancouver and went to Singapore and had made more Need for Speed and more FIFA games. And in the end, it was almost over a dozen games. But really, when the turn of making video games happened, I saw an opportunity and it got invited to work at Microsoft. And at Microsoft, I think was a huge growth opportunity, and joined them and made a game. We won't talk about that one. But then I got added on to be an art director on incubation for the Microsoft HoloLens. And it was such an amazing growth opportunity, because it was really asking yourself, do you like working in production, or do you like working in ambiguity? And can you work in ambiguity? And you start to look at the different kind of ways that you look for problem solving methods as a designer. And with that, not so many people at that time talked about human-centered design, but we really followed a human-centered design process, and we looked for differentiation, and we looked for opportunities to develop experiences that people hadn't really done other than in fantasizing. I had the luxury of working with the brilliant UX mind Bill Buxton from the University of Toronto when he was at Microsoft Research, and he had been doing some of these things in the 80s and the 90s, but with the technology that just couldn't keep up with some of these ideas. And with the HoloLens development, and it's real-time 3D, and you have your voice and your eyes and your head and your hands and where you're located, it really was just this wonderful way of saying, well, we could design something, but we can't believe it until we can experience it. And this was a massive kind of thought change of how I'd ever worked as a designer before. And I believe that this really set me up for success on how I continued to evolve. There was a time from there, I was so lucky working at Microsoft. I got to make the first holographic experience for customers to use with the Halo HoloLens experience. I got to work with NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory on-site, which was the way that geologists could make scientific decisions on Mars. And it was for 2 years, we got the latest, downlinks from the Curiosity rover and got to sit on Mars every day. It's, a kid from Calgary really questions and wonders and goes, how did I get here? But it was wonderful. Then it continued to evolve, and there was this kind of change at Microsoft where the new Microsoft started to come in, and there was the fluent design language and a real change and transformation from the failures of Windows 8 into what Windows could be with Windows 10 and changing with Windows. And for 2 years, I was the creative director of Microsoft Groove and movies and TV, and really taking those lessons I had learned and trying to apply them for what are the emotive things that customers need for music and for watching and streaming video. And it was wonderful. It really started to change me as a person and as a manager and as a team builder. From there, things continued to evolve, and for the last couple of years, I worked at Microsoft on some metaverse projects, as well as I was design director on the IVAS goggle program with the U.S. Army and Department of Defense, as well as our early incubation of collaborative computing, which is now, I think it evolved and is now called Microsoft Mesh. And all of these things just really, it's really a wonderful way of having a design career and approaching the design and really trying to understand what people, empathize with your end user and how they're going to use these experiences. I had the opportunity, just coming out of the middle part of the pandemic of switching from working in extended reality or mixed reality, whatever everyone's buzzword of it is today, and to join Fisker and really work on what I think is, we're at a very interesting point in automotive, and I think it's another one of those kind of transformation points. If you think about the big transformation points we've had of designing experiences, there's the most common cliche, Henry Ford. He said, I'd have to make a faster horse if I listen to what people want. And then maybe today's versions have been, they would have just made a better typewriter instead of Apple making the desktop interface, or they would have made a better BlackBerry if phones had kept on going and listening to what customers wanted in customer feedback. But instead, they started to use UX research and still really try to identify the need and what was the benefit they could provide. And instead of making a better BlackBerry, they made an iPhone. And so I think that today there's a really interesting transformation point of, and you can see the wonderful things that Tesla has done with moving to a full big touchscreen on their vehicles and how they've minimized everything. And I think that all auto manufacturers are going to have to keep up with the changing technology and customer needs, and really what the impact across all of these different interfaces and products the smartphones have had. And now I'm leading and have built a team and really working on how do you get to what is that customer need for safety, for delight, and is there a balance that has to take place between a touch screen and more of an analog dial or haptic type buttons. And so, yeah, that's where I'm at now.
Awesome. Just a note for our audience, I know of Todd before this huge ascension, for his work as a student at Emily Carr University of Art and Design. At that time in the communications design program, the program was so small that if you were in that program, you were pretty much guaranteed a really strong career and a lot of good opportunities, but you've really ascended. It's amazing to hear.
Oh, thank you.
Question 2, what's a key piece of knowledge that makes you different?
Well, I think that there's I don't think it's a unique story, but I grew up in a place where I always felt, I'm half Japanese, and I always felt like a bit of a misfit toy. And so I always hung out on the fringe with, people that were kind of more of alternative voices, or they were just different. And it got me into, for a long time, I was into the underground electronic music scene. I DJ'd house music. I made flyers and print and posters and records and CDs, and did all packaging design for that world. And just from having to create stuff with that world and doing it in the like cheapest, most analog way, really taught me, just ways of telling stories and influencing people and trying to promote events. And I think that taking some of those lessons that I have learned from just trying to survive in that type of way, paying my way through university, I feel has given me some tools, and I see it with many of the other artists and designers that I know from that world who have moved on to be really successful, that you just get a different outlook, and you get a different approach to things, and you have different values. And I kind of think that as I'm doing it, I've applied these lessons to the way I work and have built my team and the way I work with my team every day. And I wouldn't change anything. Well, maybe I'd change a few things, but I wouldn't really change anything, because I just feel like if I hadn't gone through, trying to discover who I was and then applying it to my design practice, it has just been wonderfully applicable and a true advantage.
It's beautifully said. Number 3, why this of all things? Why do you do what you do?
As I kind of talked about the things that where I had grown up doing, I always actually, I have a friend who I've known since I was in grade 8. And I remember when we were growing up, we always talked about what we wanted to do. And I remember always saying, oh, I'm going to be a designer, or I'm going to be a artist or a commercial artist. And he said, I'm going to be a photographer. And I always kind of, I remember my dad coming home and us sitting we had one of those awesome 80s kind of kitchen tables that had the really bad tile that was hanging from the kitchen counter on the high seats. And I remember trying to do letraset with him on these wobbly tiles and going, this is the life. Like, I am going to do this. This is awesome. And just following this natural progression, and always kind of knowing that I liked to create. I like to make things and do them in this very determined way of making them look great. And I found that I got a certain level of fiero out of it. I just got this sense of well-being and a sense of accomplishment in everything that I would do. And even in the way that I made flyers for club nights, I'd always try to make it look at this, it was this bigger thing than essentially it really was, or just try to make it look as desirable as possible and tasteful as possible. And it's just, I've continued that, and it's all I've really known, and it's just in my DNA and things that I desired to do.
That's awesome. My dad, I didn't know my dad really growing up until my teens, when I did a trip out to Hong Kong where he was, and spent time with him. in his world of being a high stakes photojournalist. And we would walk around and he would be taking pictures and pointing at things. And the next day we would see his work on the cover of Time, on the cover of Newsweek, on the newsstands. It was a definite reality shift. And yeah, I'm hugely influenced by DNA as well.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating because I have two kids, and I find that they look at the world in very similar ways, and the way it's very fascinating. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's absolutely fascinating. Number 4 is, what does your future look like?
So it's interesting. As I talked about it, like this, I'm really excited about what's going on right now. Like we're at a real genesis point. And for me, I just think that there's something into this like transformation where there's a lot of designers that had never thought about working in automotive that I think are going to start to consider, like, well, actually, it's interesting of how that interface can really travel over and how people perceive, they have their best friend in their pocket and they take it everywhere, their smartphone. And how do you travel with that? And how do you really start to ingest or share that experience across all of your devices? So I'm really excited about that. But I've also never had, I've always known I wanted to be a designer, and I always was interested in design, and it gave me drive and I pushed through it, but I've never had a plan that was etched in stone, and I've never had a plan that was, a perfect straight line. And the one thing that I've learned is that I have to be nimble, and there's going to be twists and turns. And currently my future looks like really about how do I continue to evolve and make and build a team, and we're going to make wonderful experiences for in your car and with your smartphone to work with your car. I normally have like 5-year goals, and right now I kind of have my 5-year goal. It's really like, this is what I intend on doing. But beyond that, I'm trying to stay open to what the possibilities and how we can continue the evolution and where we're going to go with it. I do think that the prevalence of machine learning and artificial intelligence will start to become more and more, and what that means for autonomous vehicles, or what those experiences will be like. I don't think they're going to happen right away. I just think that it's a giant leap that has to take. But I do also think that where we're going with it is very exciting, and we have to be open to what those experiences will be.
Great. Number 5, let's talk about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do?
Well, for me, I've always been a curious wanderer. I've always loved living in different places. I love learning and absorbing from traveling and just where I live, but I also think that place right now is interesting, because what I'm focused on is taking you from place to place. And I think that right now, especially if you're trying to move to electrification, the idea of place is fascinating, because of how do you charge your vehicle, and how do you go on long trips, and what does that mean for your journey along the way, and how long does it take? Place is something that I'm really, really fascinated with right now, of how do we make it as easy and seamless to go between places. And I think that the journey is just getting started, and I think the journey is more exciting than the place.
I recently held an assistant professor role at a school in Pune, which is a education city near Mumbai, and it was actually an automotive design school. And I knew nothing about automotive, but I was surrounded by those people, and it was interesting. Number 6, if you had to start from the beginning, what advice would you give your former younger self?
Whew. Uh, the job, like I always love this one that I say this to my kids. The job that you will have in the future probably doesn't exist right now. Now, the things that you want to do, stay true to that. Um, like I previously said, there there's two types of people. There are those that want the straight line, they want to get on the freeway. And then there's those that are hungry and curious enough that can deal with ambiguity. Like I think they used to say when I was working in Hollands, like, I want to kick you out of a helicopter and you're going to parachute down, or a plane, and you're going to parachute down. And I just want you to start hacking down the jungle and figure out where we're going. And the reality of it is, like, yeah, like sometimes you don't know where A to B is, and it's not a straight line, but you think that you want to get to B. And it's that kind of like drive of trying to learn about your surroundings and learn about who you are and what you like to do and how you can do it, and start pulling out your machete and hacking it down. And it's probably in some like big curve and you've looped back a few times. And in the reality, you go, actually, I wasn't looking for B, I was looking for C. And sometimes that's what it takes to find it, and don't give up. Be comfortable with ambiguity.
I love it. What's a day in your life like?
Oh, right now it's a bit nonstop. It's a lot of in the office, out of the office, checking out demos and experiences, and really it's calls and syncs and doing reviews, and really like pushing to find greatness and wonderful experiences. So like, but ultimately I'm a lot, I always make jokes with my team that I try to be like Phil Jackson in my day. If you watched The Last Dance, he had his Michael Jordan, his Dennis Rodman, his Scottie Pippen, and he has to wear all these different hats. And in the day, I'm a designer, I'm a manager, I'm a coach, I'm a therapist, I'm a conductor, I'm a user, I'm a motivator, I'm a presenter. Like every day is the full range of these things. And right now we're getting ready for customers to use our vehicles, and so it's really all of those things. And I love it because no day is the same. And I think I think one of your questions that you're going to ask later on is what would I not want to do? And the reality is I don't want to do the same thing every day, day in, day out. It makes me think about that Michael Douglas movie Falling Down, where you're some cubicle worker with your lunch bag and you have to wear a business uniform or whatever. And it just, no, I don't ever do that in my days, and I love it.
Did you ever see Edge of Tomorrow?
Yeah.
The main character for the audience, the main character keeps repeating his day. He wakes up the next day, but it's the same day again, but he has the chance to change it a little bit. And I think he gets in the habit of slowly, incrementally correcting things, kind of somewhat unsuccessfully, but it's good. It's a good one.
It's like Groundhog Day action movie.
That's right. Okay, number 8, lifelong learning is a popular topic. How do you stay up to date?
So, man, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I love listening to podcasts. It's when I actually, when I'm traveling between things, I listen to podcasts. When I'm trying to lay down, I listen to podcasts, and I'm always trying to consume that type of information. I would say actually recently, in the last 2.5 years, I've really reduced social media. And it's probably been the best thing possible. And I feel like now I'm searching out reading and becoming a bit of a sponge and looking for a different kind of understanding and points of views on things. And I'm really hungry to go out and try new things. It's the way that I think that we really start to kind of keep that curiosity going. And I feel like one of the best things we can do is to stay curious. And I think that if you get stuck in that treadmill of social media, that you lose that curiosity because you're being spoon fed just, serotonin hits. And so, yeah, I just get out there and listen and absorb to as much as I can.
Yeah, just a note on that. I mean, the podcasts have been a godsend, both
Oh, amazing.
being
Yeah.
a guest and hosting guests, both ways is just magical. You get to connect. Number 9, what tools do you use? Are you both digital and analog?
I'm a whole lot of I'm very digital these days. I dream of being more analog, but also like, oh, we're in an interesting point because we work in concert with many of these other teams, and it's the interesting part about making software with hardware is that you think about these ideas and you start to work out the goals for them, and you use that human-centered process into like, well, what do people need? What do they want? How do they have a low cognitive load? And you start to develop and design these things. And then there's a certain point of when you start to prototype them, and there's that marriage between the digital and the analog parts of it. And so I would like to be way more analog because I really like building experiences. I like to work from lo-fi to hi-fi, and I think that often designs get lost in people like just subjectively going, yeah, I don't think that'll work. But if you go and make it quickly and you can experience it, it's typically you'll find some magic. And so I want to be way more analog with the design work that I'm doing, but there's a lot of different intricate levels to getting it to that point. In my personal life, I'm actually trying to be significantly more analog. I've been getting out there and trying to start like making more things with my hands. I was recently doing pot throwing at a ceramic studio, and we've started doing painting doing paintings in the garage and with my son, and I'm really itching to start pulling and doing silkscreen prints again. And so it's something that I'm trying to actually get into a habit of making, so that my brain will start thinking about how do I apply that more in the digital work that I'm doing professionally. It's great. It feels great.
I miss the analog so much. I found myself at Home Depot at 10 p.m. wandering around looking for a gigantic whiteboard. I was like really like needing to impulse buy a gigantic whiteboard. And they're like, no, you got to do this ahead of time. It takes time to deliver it. And I'm like, no, I need it now. couldn't get one. I was very disappointed.
I also I stopped playing digital music, and I have a lot of records. I have about 5,000 records here in my little studio, and in the evening I just play records all the time. It just feels good.
Nice. Halfway, number 10, how do you deal with work-life balance?
Yes. Work-life balance. Work-life balance is interesting. It's actually I have a pretty good work-life balance right now. Before, in my previous roles, I had no work-life balance. There, I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, I had been working with this super talented team of the most gifted engineers at Microsoft, and we would stay up until 5 a.m. trying to figure out some of these experiences and how do you make these better collaborative experiences. And it was terrible. I had no work-life balance. And now we at my work, we have a hybrid kind of work style where I can go in a couple days of the week, but I can work at home the others. But we have multiple studios to go and test out vehicles, and that part of it, I actually find the way that working has evolved on Zoom, on Teams, on Slack, just all these different methods have made it so that my work-life balance is better, but it's also exposed me to the ways that it could be worse. But I think that you have to, in your own personal commitment to yourself, put up a certain boundary or a certain level of like, who can interrupt or who can have entry into my, me time. And so I feel like I'm actually in a really healthy place, and it's been wonderful.
Nice. 11, if you weren't doing what you do now, what would you be doing?
I probably would have stayed in music, or I would have really gone down the path of, I really love packaging design. I love the smell of printing ink. It makes me think of my grandfather and my father, and there's just some deep kind of like, it smells like home. Um, so I would have loved that. I just don't. I think I would have. I think I'm too determined and ambitious, and I would have got bored of it. Um, I I really love cooking food, and one of my best friends was a chef, and is a chef, and as we were growing up, he was going when I was going to Alberta College of Art, he was going to cooking school, and we just had a real passion for it and would make as many crazy things as possible. But I remember one time going and leaving and going, I smell like food. And be that part of it, I don't think I could ever be like a chef because I hate smelling like food. And it's just something that it's always stuck with me of like, I couldn't do that. I don't want to smell like food. And you do. And those clogs they wear, and they're not, I like sneakers.
Nice. And you kind of answered this one, but what would you not like to do in terms of career?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't want to be an accountant. Don't want to sit in a cubicle. Don't want to have to wear a business suit. No, no, no. It makes me uncomfortable.
Do you have a favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Um, yeah, like there's something I always say with my kids, and I can't remember whose quote this is. So if anyone knows, if you could just message me on LinkedIn. But it's, you don't have to be the best. You don't have to be the most talented. You just have to be willing to work the hardest. Effort trumps skill. And it's something that I've always kind of like, it's always been my driving force. It's I'm a Japanese Canadian because of what my family went through with internment. They weren't in the best place, and growing up, my dad always told me, you're on your own. And I always kept that as a principle, as a driving force within me. And I always knew that if I worked harder than anyone, that I would achieve success. And I've imprinted it so much into it is my habit, it is my DNA, that it is what I ultimately use. It's just work as hard as I can, and not in like the negative connotation of like grind me down, but it's just I won't stop until I accomplish it. It really is that quest for Fiero. And yeah, it's the thing that I try to convince my kids of it, and then they want to go on TikTok. It's that, yeah. So
That makes sense. Yeah. My dad, growing up, my dad would tell me, just show up. You have to show up, and eventually it'll work. I think that was my version of being hardworking.
oh yeah, yeah. And I look back and think the proof, like I see the proof. One of my best friends told me that he was telling my partner, he told her that I'm the most competitive person that he ever met. And I think I was like, I'm not the most competitive. And others out there, maybe you think you're like, who are you kidding? But I actually don't think it's the most competitive. I think it's I'm the most determined.
Mhm.
And so I've always, whenever there's something I wanted to accomplish or something I wanted to do, I've just put my head down and pushed through. And yeah, I just think it works.
And a least favorite word, quote, or sentence.
Everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
Now, as you can see from what I've just talked about in the quote that I like, I just don't think, and it's my partner and I were talking about it, and she was like, it was really the one that she brought up, and she says it all the time. She's like, this, and I really agree with her, because like I guess my mantra is make shit happen, and I just don't agree. I don't think that everything happens for a reason. I believe that you can manifest and you can make whatever you need happen within reason. But yeah,
If you had to choose one word to describe yourself, what word would you choose?
determined, as I had previously explained.
What keeps you up at night?
Oh, honestly, kids. Like, I thinking about my kids, and it really goes into that, like balancing out kids and work, and thinking about the state of the world. But you know it's really fascinating what it does to you to have children. And I used to always like just stay up late listening to music and wonder about how fascinating our world was. And now I stay up at night wonder or worrying and thinking about what have we done to the state of our world for our kids. But um yeah, I guess that's what loving your kids does.
Do you have a dream you're chasing?
I've always fantasized about getting to a place where I can just make for me. And I don't know if it's a daydream or if it's just I'm trying to work myself to get to the point where I just want to make things because I want to make them. And it's actually kind of a foreign it's kind of foreign for me, because at the times, like even as I'm trying to get out there, and whether I do it a bit when I make music. Sometimes I produce house music, and really that is for me. And I think that's where I started to get this yearning to make other things for me. I really want to make furniture and do woodworking and these types of things, and finding the time and the breathing room to relax and to get to it, where you can take on a project that's just for you, is I'm slowly getting there. The work-life balance is starting to help, but um yeah, that's my dream.
Final stretch number 18. What inspires you?
um I love to just wonder about things, and I'm curious, and I love to wander. I always had this thing I used to talk about osmosis and going places, and just you're a sponge and just absorbing things from meeting people and visiting places and eating foods and just things that you see and experience. And it's I think the pandemic was really interesting because it really prevented a lot of that. And I think as you get out there and as started to see the world come back to life, and it was because of you got to wander, you got to mix with different people and do all those different experiences. And it just is, I get so much inspiration from going and having these experiences. Like recently I've been traveling to Austria quite a bit for work. And I got to spend quite a bit of time well, not quite a bit of time, just a few little trips here and there in wandering in Vienna. And I've just loved it. And just going to all these different, sorry, my dog is coughing. Okay. Going in and out of all these different experiences. And sorry, Thomas, this is one you may have to edit. The dog is making weird noises. Okay, there we go. Edit back from here. But going in and just taking it all in and seeing all these different like ways that people live, and it's just fascinating.
Nice. And our last couple here, number 19, any advice you'd like to share?
Well, one, like, empathy is the designer's friend, right? Like, clearly, like, empathy for what your customer is going to experience or what they're going to feel or use. And empathy also in the workplace professionally, like understanding what people's approach to designs are, how they're trying to solve a problem. If you're empathetic and you're open to different ideas, like one of the biggest things I talk about on my team is that being a designer, you need to influence people to, got to tell a good story to love the designs that you and your team are making. And you can't just steamroll. You have to start to empathize with who you're presenting to, or what is the audience for the design that you're making. So empathy is your friend. Some other things I say to my designers are like, be a chipmunk, right? Like, sometimes you make some great designs, but they're not always perfect for what you're trying to solve on that day or what the feature is that you're developing. So just don't take no for an answer there. Just stuff that design deep in your brain or inside your cheek and hoard it for another day, because great design solutions are great design solutions. And sometimes it doesn't fit perfectly for this customer need, but it may for another. What else? Sometimes like when I was at Microsoft and we were working at HoloLens, we just pushed for differentiation. Differentiation. Has anyone done this before? How is it different? And the thing I really learned from there, which I always tell people, is that, like, sometimes low-hanging fruit is just really delicious fruit, right? Like, so don't try to find differentiation, but sometimes the low-hanging fruit is you just need to take that low-hanging fruit and make it wonderful, because only wanting to be different can just suck all the life out of an experience. Yeah, and I think get into a prototype as quick as you can. Follow that human-centered experience or design process, and lo-fi to hi-fi, experience it. Like, that's the thing I can push the most.
I really like the expression low-hanging fruit, and I was having dinner with my dad and I kept saying low-hanging fruit, and he's like, why do you keep saying that? Like, what's with that expression? And then I saw him post on social media using the expression. It was bizarre. Okay, number 20, and here's the big one. How can our listeners keep tabs on you? You mentioned LinkedIn, but then there's Fisker. What should we do?
LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the best way to reach out, send a message, say hello. I've really reduced all social media. I'm just more of a casual dabbler on that, but LinkedIn is by far. I sometimes on Twitter, but a lot less now. But yeah, LinkedIn. And if you want to reach out, say hello, send a message. I'm usually pretty quick on replying ish. But yeah, thank you so much. This
Okay,
has been
thank
great.
you. Yeah, no, thank you so much, Todd. I mean, you're clearly of the highest caliber, in the categories of people that we like to have on the show. And, these are the episodes that we really live for. So thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.